Now, I get really different responses to this. I'll give you 3 schizoid responses to this, okay? One person looked at me, and he was a very high functioning person, and we're picturing a man from the office in a suit. He does a very high level job, and he's a nice guy. And I forget how we even knew each other, how he got referred to me or whatever, but this was his first session. And I said, where would you like to sit? He gets a funny look, a little smile on his face. And I say, I see a little smile. What are you thinking? He says, do you really want to know where I'd like to sit? I said, yeah, I'd really like to know where you'd like to sit. He said, out in the hall as far from you as possible. Okay, that wasn't a big, guess my diagnosis.
Right away. Check. Yeah.
Okay, so I know what I was dealing with, and he had come from a fairly nice family, but an intrusive parenting situation. Yeah. So when he tried to crawl, and instead of letting him crawl, his mother would lift him up like he was a puppy and put him back where she wanted him. When he was sitting in the high chair eating, when he was full and he didn't want to eat anymore, she'd put the food on his head and it would drip down his face because he was supposed to eat. She was afraid he'd die if he didn't eat. This guy wasn't dying so soon. You know, it was
really healthy. He was perfectly fine. Yes.
The high functioning, but so we were on, this is high functioning schizoid. He could tell me, he was smiling. Yeah. He could sit close.
He had some self-awareness enough to know the joke of that.
Yes. And I started seeing him my first year in practice. So I really didn't know squat, but, you know, a year or two, but, it was, you know, an easy thing to understand, you know, that what a sensitivity was. If you have to be very far from other people, you don't have to understand schizoid. You just have to really listen closely to know people, or he's afraid of being close and he needs to take his distance. So I said, okay, we could try doing the session with you out in the hall, but I want you to know other people live in this building. So you might have the privacy you like. Is there a place in the room that you would prefer, that would feel okay? He says, no, I can handle it. Don't worry. You know, and he sat himself in a normal chair, a normal distance from me. Okay. Now I have another person, they come in the room and he sits down not facing me. I have 2 people that do that at different points. And, so this very privileged family doesn't know himself, doesn't know what he likes. And when he sits down facing the fireplace, which is fine, but the fireplace is over there. He's facing there. Yeah. I'm over here. Yeah. So all I see is the side. So I think, well, this is strange. And again, this is before I had a whole, you know, lessons and lessons and books about schizoid. And I know strange when I see it. I mean,
you actually don't need to be studied to think that that's a little bit strange. Yes.
Yes, but you don't have to be a brilliant diagnostician to know that
that's a little bit odd.
Yeah. And he was a heterosexual man of about my age, and most heterosexual men are okay with facing me. You know, we were both kind of youngish, and usually they want to face me. And he's facing the fireplace. So I said, well, you know, I have a question. I'm a little bit curious. And he says, what is it? And he's still facing the fireplace. And he looks a little. And I said, well, you know, you're the first person that's taken a seat facing the fireplace instead of me. There's people who sat on the sofa facing the fireplace. Wasn't that obvious because the sofa's over here, you know, they turn their head and I'm right here and we're catty corner. What would you mind telling me how you happened to choose that seat? He says, oh, it was the first one I saw.
Yeah, I'm sure it was the first one. Given the lens that we see life through, I'm sure that was the first one you saw.
So, you know, this was a person who didn't have much life. He says, I don't really care. I said, well, do you like sitting there? You know, I'm trying to elicit some information. He says, well, one seat or another seat doesn't matter to me. So this is a degree of detachment from interpersonal that, my ears are starting to perk up.
Yeah.
I'm a New Yorker, he's a New Yorker. New Yorkers will kill you to get a better seat.
Yeah.
You try and sit in a restaurant, you try and sit in New York or in a bad seat at a restaurant.
Yeah. Or the subway. You're constantly vying for like, what's a good seat on the subway, or what's a good seat in the theater, or what's a good seat everywhere,
So if we were in the Midwest and he was Minnesota nice, or if we were in Canada and he was being polite, it might not have been such a huge red flag. But this was not a delicate flower. It turned out that he collected vintage designer cars, things like that. And why did he collect them? Because he didn't know what he liked in life. And so he only found that he liked cars, and he had a lot of car magazines.
Yeah.
So he didn't know himself. He didn't have any interpersonal relationships. And in his family, no one had noticed he was odd, apparently.
Yeah. You know which is bizarre, because, well, then again, you're not really noticing. So the thing that I love about what you're talking about, and what that Gestalt does is like inherent in the modality is a level of curiosity and following what's present. And it's like very much improv, right? Like improv, it's always yes and so you're not saying, like with improv, you're not saying, no, you did it wrong, you have to do it this way. With improv, it's something just happened in the room, and so you go with it. It's okay, yes, and let's just go with that thing. And so what I appreciate is that you had this person behaving of the whatever way they're behaving, and you go, that's curious. Yes. And let's see what this comes about. Like, let's just like be curious inside of this.
Yeah, we have, as I started to say, the concept of the Gestalt therapy experiment, which is we propose something that we don't know how it's going to work out.
Yeah. Yes.
And that's perfectly fine, because something will happen or not happen. And so it's a very creative therapy. So now it was centered around his likes, his dislikes, his seat. Should I talk about 2 other techniques, or
like I want to, like, I could talk about, like, I want to hear about like how you work with people. Like, what are certain things that you do with people who have schizoid? I know what I've done for myself, which is, and I know what I do with people who I didn't realize it was schizoid. I just have always been like, okay, this person's super sensitive, and I just slow things down.
You see, you're really intuitive.
Yeah, and just like locate where they are on the map, get them into earth, and then like have them come back into their bodies little by little, and like it's just literally like asking them. So I know how, and I do that with myself. I do that with others. I do that like when I'm working with people. But I like wanted to know, like, what do you do?
Well, first of all, you said a couple of things. One, if the person's in a dissociated state, we might work to help them reown. In a dissociated state, the way that you described it, there's also derealization. They don't feel like themselves. They don't feel like anything is real. Depersonalization. It's like it's happening to somebody else. One man, very clever, he figured his way out of it. He would get up in the morning, and he'd been still in the dissociated state that he's been in, but he wanted to get out of it, and he's a very clever person. So he taught me quite a lot. He says, I go to the mirror, and the person I see there, I don't recognize. But I tell myself, these are my eyes, and I touch it. This is my nose, and these are my lips. This is my face, and I do my best to get back into my body, because I'm really not in it.
Yes.
And to give you the dream that goes with the thing that you were describing about being hidden inside, is one woman told me this dream that I include in my chapter on dreams, that chapter 13. It took me 40 years. The reason I'm so high on chapter is I spent 40 years collecting schizoid dreams. And I put it together, and I told what it made about their interpersonal contact, and what it revealed about their readiness for contact.
Yes.
In this dream, the woman said, and she was a very well-groomed working, she worked in New York, and she says, I had this funny dream. Are you interested in hearing it? I said, yes, I'm interested in hearing it. I said, what was funny about it? She says, well, in the dream, I'm just ahead. I'm a very well made up head. I have my hair's done. Everything's just perfect. My makeup's on, but there's no body. And I'm in the subway and I'm at the top of the subway steps and I bounce down on my head and I go and I take a subway and she said, the strange thing is no one seems to notice that I'm just a head.
Uh,
And that was the dream.
If that's not a telling parallel, like perfect dream for someone who literally just wants to float around in their head and not be seen and not be noticed, it's right on the money.
Yep. And the head literally was walking, but it didn't have legs. It was just popping. She described going down step by step, bouncing on the bottom of it, and that it didn't hurt. She didn't feel anything in her.
That's ideal.
There's no
that's ideal. That's ideal. It's like, oh, good. I'm safe.
Yeah, I'm buried in here. No one can see me. All they see is that I'm terribly well groomed and I have a brain.
Yes.
And everything else.
So then what do you do when someone comes in? So how do you work with your schizoid clients that come in and like with the challenge of coming back into the body and back into feeling, which in and of itself is a challenge because they've spent so much of their lives and so much of their default is to not do that. And so how do you, I can talk about what I've done, but like, I'm curious about what you do as the Gestalt, like how do you, I mean, Gestalt therapy is all about like slowly coming back into the body and starting to pay attention and being curious. But if there's something else that you want to add.
Well, often if the person's had severe trauma and they're having flashbacks or else they're so detached, I occasionally get people that have no knowledge of their inner life, that the detachment is really extreme. Or one person, the outside, I asked one person to tell me the difference, what she wanted me to tell trainees or people that I spoke to. And she said, you really can't tell what's on the inside from the outside. And there are some people that are so detached that they need a body therapy with the therapy that I'm doing or before. So I will refer people out for somatic experiencing or whatever type of thing.
Ding, 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 for sure.
You're going to need a body therapist.
Yeah.
I referred someone out. Frank Bosco is a music therapist who's also a body therapist, and he's the president of the New York Institute for Gestalt Therapy. Thank you, Frank. And he's really good. When I needed some body work, I went to Frank. And so sometimes I'll refer him somebody because I know that he will get them through working with instruments. He's got lots of toys that allow people to express themselves and to begin to get in touch. Mm-hmm. So they will need somebody like Frank X. Bosco, I believe. Matthew Whaley at the Gestalt Center does somatic experiencing therapy. Judy Schwa, who is my student at the Gestalt Center, is wonderful. And I'll give her a commercial. And she has a newsletter, and she spells Schwa, Choix. Bosco is Bosco. I will try and work with a body worker when there is an opportunity and when it's financially prudent. If it's not financially prudent, often the problem is the body worker, with just sending them to a body worker straight. First is that person has to be educated in schizoid personality disorder, because otherwise body work can be very intrusive.
And traumatizing if you don't really know what you're doing. Like you could open up something and then not really know what the hell. I will tell you from my experience, from my, like what I did was I did Gestalt for so much of my therapy for good, 9-10 years. It's like I had so much trauma that I was working through that a lot of what I did was I knew at some point that talk therapy just was not going to cut it. And I needed to do somatic, it had happened to my body, the trauma was in my body, and I knew that I needed to do something somatically to get me back in. And so I started to do very aggressive, I tried everything, everything. But then it would open me up, and I didn't know what the hell I was doing at that time. They didn't know what the hell they were doing at that time. Like nobody knew what the hell they were doing. I'm in my 50s. And so now there's so much focus on somatic healing. And then I would go back to Gestalt therapy, and we would explore it and then ground it back. I'd be able to then put words to the thing I had in my body, and then they'd be able to come together, like what was going on here and what was going on here and what was going on here would all come together and be able to verbalize and then like finally get cohesive again, if that makes sense.
It does. And what I do is in my office in New York, I have where I see people in person. I can't do this. I do other things now because we're working remotely, but I have toys.
What kind of toys?
I have stuffed animals. I have little things of all sorts of things. I have shamanic tools. I have Tibetan bells with cross doors. I have things that you can dance with, like the bells that are sewn into the ankle bracelets.
Yeah.
And I will have someone get up, and I also do Tai Chi.
Yes.
And sometimes I will do Tai Chi with the person. And I will let's get up and let's do this and let's try, and then we'll face me, or I say, well, I'll put on some music, and you can just go around the room. You can touch anything you want, because my files are all put away. So there's nothing, you can look at the books. There's a lot of interesting things in the room you can play with, you can touch, you can do, but we're walking and we're moving, because the sitting business came from Freud lying down on the sofa. It's wonderful, but it's not for everybody. Sitting and talking. So I will look to do something like, I have two of these Tibetan bells, and one's higher toned, one's lower toned, and other things. And I'll say, pick the one you like the sound of.
Yeah.
And I will pick the other if it doesn't annoy them, and then we will walk around, and one of us will ring a bell and the other will ring a bell.
And by the way, this is usually, and I just want to say, this is done with the person's like full, like enthusiastic consent. This is not something that's like suggested, especially for people who are schizoid. You can't just like say something like that. They'll never come back. They will literally be gone for the rest of their lives. They'll never come back.
Exactly. Basically, I introduce things from all different angles, and anything is. My girlfriend Rosalind Fleischer, who's not a therapist, but she's very wise, and she's a student of the Zohar. She said to me once, "Anything is a tool, Elinor, if you know how to use it."
Yes.
So
life is a tool, like even life, like relationships, everything that happens, you walk in, like everything is actually an inquiry into like, that's curious, that's fascinating, that's a tool for more self-discovery and more inquiry, for sure. Everything.
So I use tarot cards, anything. There is something called the elemental array, a 4-card thing where you use the 4 aces, and it's a projective test invented by the tarot school, Walden and Amberstone. And so I had a woman who I didn't know was schizoid, and I didn't know much about her. And she turned out to be incredibly, incredibly creative. And she did something I had never seen before, which allowed us to talk the rest of the thing. And that's where I knew there was more to her. If it's just seeing her, I wouldn't have seen this. I'm kind of thick. People think I'm the most subtle, sensitive. No, you're probably more sensitive than I am. I identified with Princess Diana when she said she was thick as a stick. Because obvious in front of me. So this woman, everyone else, I would have them put these cards in the order they liked them. Turn over a card, put it in the order. It was a projective test. It wasn't a divination reading. And then I'd say, make the spacing so that it represents how you feel about the cards. Well, this woman got up, walked around, the first person ever. I mean, her mind really was different. And I saw there was so much more to her than she showed on the surface. Yeah. She did something so clever and creative, is she put them in different places in the room. And at different levels. She used 3 dimensions.
Yeah, it wasn't just this like little thing. Well, it also says something about her that she actually is like able to take up more space in the world. But yes.
But through the method of the cards, because in reality, she likes to sit at the far end of the far end of the place at work and not be spoken to. And have
her inner world.
Her inner world is vast. And so the contrast between what I saw and then what she did told me there was so much, there was a vast universe of things within this woman that was going to be very, very interesting to discover if she would allow me. And the other thing is, all of this, as you pointed out, is not giving people orders. This is an experiment. They give permission or they don't give permission. If you don't like it, I tell people, my job is to read the books, know the theories, get certified, figure out some stuff I can do. This is a custom-made therapy that you're paying for. Your job is to tell me what's working for you, what's not working for you.
Yeah. Which, by the way, in and of itself, for people, you know, like I know from my own experience, in and of itself, the risk, the deep, like large risk of just saying out loud, I like this, I don't want this. It is so sensitive and risky to even say. So especially in Gestalt, or especially in those kinds of therapeutic surroundings, it is a safe environment. And I say that purposefully. It is a safe environment. It is a purposeful, safe environment to start exploring that muscle, that discovery, that inquiry of, not only do I get to discover what I like, but even more important, maybe, is that I actually get to say it out in the world and be safe to do so. I just wanted to add that, because that process is incredibly important for people who feel this way.
I think, yes, I think what you're saying is very important to add. And also, I wouldn't be surprised if you're sitting on the other end and you're watching this and you find, to your surprise, you're identifying with schizoid. This has happened for me. I teach therapists, and in every workshop I've done, at least one person has actually broken down crying, saying, that's me. That's the first time I ever heard myself described. I never fit into any of the boxes. I tried to fit myself into borderline or whatever. My therapist never quite understood what to do with me. You just described my deepest fears. You know, they were very brave to say this, because, I mean, first the person ran out of the room crying.
Yes.
Okay, this was after they came back. So all I knew was I'm giving a workshop. 1 day's on borderline, 2 days are on borderline, 2 days are on narcissism, 2 days are on schizoid, and finishing up. And so I finally reached, we've done borderline, we've done narcissist, 3 types of narcissism, and now we're doing schizoid. And as I'm speaking, the person gets up and runs out of the room crying. And so, you know, I continue speaking. I don't say anything about it, because the last thing when you're running out of the room crying, you want to sort of say, well, we'll come back, or why are you, you know, so I just, you know, this Gestalt therapy is organismic self-regulation.
Yeah.
It's their business. This is what she needed to do.
You trust them.
She needed to run out of the room crying. It's none of my business. It's
Yeah.
her business.
Yeah.
And, you know, I'm not going to make it my business without asking her. And so when she finally came back into the room and she was composed, I said, I had a question I'd like to ask, but you don't have to answer any questions if you don't want to. You know, I'm curious, and I imagine some other people are curious. And she said, no, I don't mind answering the question. I ran out of the room, and then she said, this is the first time I was overcome. This is the first diagnosis. I've never heard of this before. And it was like you were describing my life, my parents. And I just, you know, I needed some space, and thank you.
It's a big
and if I get, she said, really, you know, this is an incredible thing to get out of. I wasn't expecting to find out anything about me or whatever, or nothing that touched me this deeply. And she was a therapist, so she had words.
Yeah.
But this has happened a lot. So if you're finding out about this through me, through just finding out about it, you probably don't know much about differential diagnosis, and you might want to look at to prepare. The literature on schizoid personality disorder is kind of dense. It's made for therapists. It's not often made for people who have it. And in addition, to this. So that's why I usually point people towards, I have an article on Psychology Today about what is schizoid personality disorder. Or I have another article, could your narcissistic boyfriend really be schizoid?
Yeah, Dr. Elinor Greenberg is a prolific writer, and you should also, if you want to have more information, find her on Quora, and then also find her on Psychology Today. She's prolific. She writes all the time on both of those venues and mediums.
In fact, if you're seeing this in February 21, the February-March issue of Psychology Today has a 3-page article by me, the print edition, in addition to the online edition, has something else. The print edition put a slightly edited version of my How Do You Treat Narcissistic Personality Disorder in it. So I'm in the print version. This month I'm in the print version, and I'm in
the online one.
Blog, Understanding Narcissism, which they gave me permission to add other personality disorders too.
Good, finally, because you know why? Because we have them. It's needed in the world. We were also talking before about free videos and things that are on the Institute for Gestalt. So tell us a little bit about like the things that people can actually go to see if they're interested in Gestalt therapy, if they're interested in this kind of thing.
Well, for Gestalt therapy, I had mentioned in last time, Robert Resnick did a series of beautiful videos of him working in a Gestalt relational way. He changed the way he worked over the years. And he did this to substitute for the Pearls videos. Other people have done videos, but they were done a long time ago, and he wanted to do this. And if you Google Robert Resnick and his lovely wife, Rita, they have an institute out in California. You can there's a free 30-minute introduction that they have to Gestalt therapy, and the other ones are available if you want more. Now, the New York Institute for Gestalt Therapy, I'm a member of that, and being a full member is equivalent to being faculty. And I used to be one of the program directors, Sandra and me, and every month we do a free program, and everybody's invited, as long as you're not too disruptive. You don't have to be a therapist. You don't have to know anything about Gestalt therapy. So every month there's a program. If you go to the website, Google New York Institute for Gestalt Therapy, the web, I forget what the web page is, and you go to events. They're now doing them by Zoom. And people are doing these wonderful senior Gestalt therapists are doing these free presentations on topics. So you just look at the topics, and I would say, invite yourself to one of these, sign in for it. And they'll give you the date. And we're doing our best in Gestalt therapy land, as in all the other lands of therapy, to try and keep things going, to keep training going. The Gestalt Center for Psychotherapy and Training, where I'm on faculty there, where I designed and teach an 8-session course on personality adaptations. They have people doing workshops for them. There's usually a free intro to Gestalt, and then there's other people's workshops that might have some charge to it. But they also host programs. There is also in New York, because I'm a New Yorker, the what's called the Gap. Now, the Gap isn't where you buy clothes in New York. The Gap is Gestalt's Associates for Psychotherapy. And they often do a really great intro to Gestalt therapy, where they do one of these things where you imagine, they do a guided presentation. You imagine you're a chair or something, be the chair, or I'm the chair, and I'm big, and I'm this and that, and so forth, or I'm in the corner of a room and nobody ever sits in me. And,
yeah.
And I wish they would. You know what I mean? So that would, you can go to those resources in New York. I mean, these are 3 institutes in New York that all give programs on Gestalt therapy, and that all have things that you can see. And they also have the 2 of them have psychoanalytic programs, and I'm active in one of them because I was trained as both an analyst, a Gestalt therapist, an Ericksonian hypnotherapist, and a group therapist. So yeah, I did Gabe Howard, is that his name? I did a Psych Central podcast on schizoid personality disorder, because I believe it's going to be the next big thing. Because for people who distance, one of the things that allows them to adapt to everyday reality is that we're in everyday reality. We have to find a way to live with other people or to live among other people. And one of the problems with the internet that's begun to show up is I get a lot of young techies coming to me with schizoid personality disorder because they were encouraged, their parents meant well, they were always technologically inclined. So they've been on the computer since they were a little kid. They now have very low social skills.
Mm-hmm.
Their parents were really pleased because they were top of their class. They got into a good college. They're now working in the technology industry, and they're still not working with people. And some of them have schizoid personality disorder because they were pushed to do this. And there was no intention to harm these kids. It was all, you're going to study, you're going to be, what's the harm? There's time for you to be social later. You'll have your whole life to meet girls or boys or whatever.
Yeah, or at least they're not getting into trouble. They're going to be successful. It's like this was actually sort of a dream child in the sense that they're not getting into drugs and alcohol and it's not a bad thing on paper.
But now what they're finding is these kids are not leaving home in some cases, or if they are leaving home, they are really starting to complain about the lack of social ability that they have, the lack of friends they have. They're too scared to date, and they are faking it. If they are going out, they are faking laughing. Everything is fake because they feel so uneasy among people. And and COVID is not helping this. COVID is making this much worse.
Oh, yeah.
Because most of the people, and this is another nugget from the great Ralph Klein, who's still around somewhere out there. Ralph, if you hear this, contact me. And I lost it what was the last thing I said?
You were saying that with COVID, it's gotten worse.
Oh yes. What Ralph had said to us is he said, at least probably half of the schizoid people, and schizoid is short. I don't mean people with schizoid, people who exhibit the pattern of behavior and coping skills that we call schizoid and thinking, adapt to it and have a good enough adaptation. They marry, they have a job, or they live by themselves. They adapt. Well, why did they adapt? They adapted because they were exposed to other people and they had to adapt. But if you didn't have to adapt, if you spent the last 2 years of your life, of your young life in quarantine, in a lockdown, doing your job on the screen, and your job was a job, a remote job anyway half the time because you're working on computers, you're working in the video game industry on video games and things like that. You're spending all day on the screen as we are, and then any socializing that they're doing is taking place on the screen or is so limited. So they're losing those 2 years as a young person when they might find a way to adapt and date. They're losing that, and they're not going to get those 2 years back.
And especially if you already skew towards that, it actually solidifies and exacerbates that whole entire patterning, and you get success on some level for it, but then on a social level, you're atrophied.
Exactly. And it's not that these 2 years are going to cause schizoid. No. What it is, and people who are already, as you said, predisposed to this adaptation are not going to have the opportunity for a while to work themselves out of it and find a balance for themselves between being with people and not being with people. And the main issue with schizoid is to maintain their autonomy and not be intruded upon. And so people work out adaptations. We were talking about possibly you having some schizoid adaptations. Well, obviously you worked out quite a few because we're on screen for the entire world. This is not exactly a schizoid place to be.
Yeah, I'm getting married. I live with someone. I have lots of friends. Like I actually I've worked through quite a lot of it. And certainly I recognized, are you kidding me? When I was a kid, we're talking about when I was a kid, I literally lived this, you'll recognize it, lived in my fantasy world and barely spoke. And people my school for the longest time thought that I was, had to be put. And then when I finally took a test, they realized, no, I was not. cognitively impaired, so no, yep.
I'll interrupt you for a sec because I know we're limited in time, but you're saying something super important
Yeah.
that will resonate with people, is that one of the other signs that my clients are schizoid is that they have this very, very rich fantasy life.
Oh my God.
A lot of time in. And the fantasy life is more real to them than everyday life. And they have fantasy crushes. Some of my clients are harmless stalkers. What do I mean by a harmless stalker? Is they see somebody that they like, that they're creating a fantasy life within their head. And say you're a college student, you begin to know that girl's schedule, that young woman's schedule, and you try and see her. I have a harmless stalker who lives in my neighborhood, and I know he used to like to see me on the street because he knew when my lunch hour was, and he would casually be standing in front of a building, and we would run into each other, and he was never offensive. I'm not talking about people you have.
Just that it was important to see you. They had a relationship with you, even though they didn't have a relationship with you. Yes.
That's right. And so my clients are pretty honest. One of the important things with my schizoid clients that I have found is to tell the truth.
Oh God, yes. That's one of the things where I finally start, yes.
Fantasy life, tell the truth. Don't go up in that spaceship. You're going to go out, the risk.
And if you do, start to literally start to talk yourself back in and start to where in your body do you have a sensation? Start to talk about that sensation. Start to actually, is there heat? Is there hot? Is there prickly? Is there literally start to bring yourself back into your body?
That's really good, the stuff that you were saying.
Yeah,
so that's
yeah. This is really.
You do coaching?
Oh, I do. Absolutely. I do coaching, and I do group, and I do individual, and yes.
Okay. So we'll give you a commercial here because you have an innate sense of this. And I really think that for a long time, I didn't teach schizoid personality disorder. The reason I have so few articles on it is I really felt that people who had more schizoid in them, who understood it intuitively, should be doing. Now, therapists have problems. Therapists start with more problems than the average person, but also with more interest in therapy. Is that correct? So then we work our way out of our problems. We go to all this therapy and we find that, oh, therapy works. What a surprise. I didn't realize that. It works sometimes because I had some really bad therapists. And be careful with therapists because you want to have more to do this in a certain order, because I had a really bad body therapist who was
yeah, I have some things to say that will maybe save it for another time, but yes, body therapy is we'll talk about that at a later
But
date.
it's rare for me to meet someone like yourself who's so well-rounded and who has these abilities and who understands. And so that's the ideal, that you would be understood by your therapist, whether they had studied it, or whether they had it in themselves or they had an interest in the area. It really helps, because a lot of therapy techniques can be very intrusive, which is fine. Like the reason.
And it's intrusive in a way that in the regular life, it's not intrusive under normal, everyday talk. It just feels intrusive. I was just talking about this with my ex-husband, my fiance.
Somebody.
The person who I live with, and then I want to spend the rest of my life. In fact, but I was just talking about this with him, where I'm getting to a deeper place inside of myself of I'm coming out on a deeper level. And at that deeper level, I don't know what we were talking about, but even the barest insertion of his thoughts or opinion, even the barest of it, I was like,
done the differential now. This is not borderline land. My borderline clients, the great thing about borderline clients, you can be very straightforward with them. They'll fight.
But it's so weird because I literally show all three. It's when I was much younger, I was definitely more malignant, narcissistic.
We work our way out of things.
Yeah.
And some things stay a bit longer, and you'll find the tendencies within you. However, if I see the combination, and then you know yourself. I only know you very little, actually, compared to how comfortable we are. So you would be a good example of somebody who could talk about how you can evolve out of something and it can take another shape. I don't consider them comorbid. I think that people can evolve, and some of the evolutions all the personality disorders are doing normal things excessively. And they're not doing certain other things that are normal. So it's not necessary to say that, well, okay, we've evolved into this, but schizoids are using defenses that everybody uses. They're just using them more often.
Yes.
And
Yes.
we're looking at frequency. So one of
And
the
severity, frequency and severity.
severity. So someone can evolve out of and take on certain defenses. I've been, you know, I borrow defenses that my clients do well. I said, well, I'm organized in my brain. I'm organized in my closet. I'm sloppy about everything else. I make nests around me. So I tend to gain weight if I eat a lot of sweets or I eat excessively. I really don't need much food. So when I was anxious, I would eat. So I said, well, let me see what my clients are doing when they're anxious. Maybe there's a better coping mechanism. So I had a woman who was excessively clean. Now that was a problem for her and her family, but it wasn't going to be a problem for me because there was no way I was going to be excessive.
You were not going to be excessive. You just wanted to be clean. Yeah.
So I looked at what did she do when she was anxious? And what she did when she was anxious is she scrubbed the kitchen floor, which was already scrubbed, and she re-neatened and tossed out things. I said, perfect, I'm going to learn her coping mechanism. So we can all learn from each other. It's only a personality disorder if it's done to excess, if it's done rigidly, if it's non-productive, if it's in the wrong situation. Personalities are made up of normal human abilities, even disassociation, even excessive fantasy life. We all fantasize. We all have these abilities. Sometimes we want distance from other people. You don't have to, like if you're seeing yourself in this and say, I do that, doesn't mean you have a personality disorder, which we could go into the criteria for that at another time. It just means, are you doing it excessively?
And doing it without choice. Like that's also another thing is that if it's doing you as opposed to you doing it, and you actually can't stop. And it's one of those things that if there's a suggestion that you stop, you A, can't, or B, it's so threatening to stop, then that's actually a sign that you might have adapted in a way or disordered, you know, psyche in a way that you can put some attention on and some curiosity on so that you can have more choice in life. That's all that health is to be able to choose more and have more agency and have more access and have more self-directed power.
Exactly. So this is the important thing is people are always saying to me, oh, can this be fixed? I heard that there wasn't therapy for this. Well, there's so many therapies out there now. Borderline, there's so many therapies for borderline personality disorder, narcissistic personality disorder. We're going to start seeing more for schizoid, but there are therapies for schizoid. All the personality disorders you can evolve out of your disorder.
You can, 100%, 100%. It takes commitment. It takes a real like choosing ongoing, like going to the gym or going on a diet or like anything or a career. It's like anything. It takes time, effort, commitment, and like a real intention to get better, like anything.
Yes, exactly. I liken it to learning a foreign language or learning a musical instrument. You would practice every day with the musical instrument. You would practice with the foreign language. There's none of this like you can get, you know, instead of just coming once a week, I give people lots of homework if they're open to it. Yes. Some people, the very word homework, it has such a negative charge to them that one guy said, I never do homework. I didn't do homework in school. I won't do homework. You can't make me do homework. He ended up a narcissistic diagnosis, and I was fine. I had to work my way around his little roadblocks. But so if not, you know, these things you can evolve. There's always another step you can take, a place to evolve to, and they don't have to be big steps. There's a thing, and I wish I could give the guy credit. I was reading a women's magazine in which they had this little blurb where they summarized, you know, research, and they called his blurb "Outwit Your Amygdala." So I've been looking for those phrases so I could read his book. But basically, the amygdala in our brain are our stop sign. So when the amygdala go off, we stop. It's supposed to keep us from going off the cliff, from doing dangerous things. But some of us when we start to get better and we want to do healthy things, our amygdala goes off like it's a bad thing because we've never done it before. It's scary.
Have negative associations. And yes, absolutely. Or like a lot of people who have been sober for 20 something years, their life starts to get better. All of a sudden they go off because it's such a negative association. Yes, continue.
So what he suggested in this little brief article, which was brilliant, which other people have suggested, but was you outwit your amygdala by taking you keep making your steps small enough that it doesn't chime as scary. You're going to get there eventually. You're just going to take what for you is a smaller step. So just find the step.
So here's a perfect example. If you've got 100 pounds to lose, instead of saying, I'm going to buy all the workout clothing and I'm going to put on your sneakers and take a walk outside for 5 minutes. That's it. That's it. Do that for a week. Do that for 2 weeks. And then the following, then you go, all right, I'm going to up it for another 20. Like you literally take micro moves. You go micro moves in the right direction. Eventually you will get, like you start in Poughkeepsie, but you will end up in Paris if you do micro moves every day.
Yes, it's exactly like that. I'm a writer now. And I have a book out, Borderline Narcissistic and Schizoid Adaptations, The Pursuit of Love, Admiration, and Safety. And what you need to know about me is I had a writing phobia when I entered college. I didn't know how to write. And I was scared to write, and I failed. I had to they gave me an exam at Columbia University, and they said, well, you have to take expository writing. You don't know how to write. And I said, I know I don't know how to write. I'm scared to write. My father told me, he lived through the McCarthy era, Elinor, never sign anything. Well, I took that too literally. I must have been a really little kid. I was afraid to write, to sign anything, to put my words down where they could be seen later. And I took expository writing. I failed it the first time. Then I took it a second time with someone else who was good. And I got over my writing phobia.
If that is not epigenetics, I don't know what is. If that is not some sort of like epigenetic, like giving of some sort of belief and some sort of something into the next generation, and you got over it, that's exact, but you worked, you did it every single day and you were committed.
That's right. And the same thing, I would love to do that with math. I didn't have a chance to pass because I didn't learn any math. And I had a deep water phobia. That's how I learned Ericksonian hypnotherapy. I decided to cure my own phobia and try phobia cures. And so there's always something you can do that's small, that's doable. And I didn't say when I said I just need to write well enough so I can get through college. I just need to know enough math to understand statistics, because I knew I had 2 years of statistics to take. One as an undergrad, one as a grad. And that scares therapists. If it didn't scare therapists, we would be MDs. Yeah. But I know that became psychologists are interested in people. Most of the people that I know that became MDs and ended up as psychiatrists were interested in science. They didn't have to have people attached. It could be people's innards and things like that. And for me, everything had to do with people. And if it didn't have a person in it, I didn't learn it.
Yes, yeah. That's how I feel too. I feel the same way. So this was really, really insightful and helpful and like sort of an eye-opening experience for me in this conversation. I hope it was for the people who were also listening as well. If you have questions, if there's any more information that you would like to know about, whether it's Dr. Elinor's work, other questions about other adaptations or disorders, if you have questions about like what's a way, I've been there and done that. And if there's something that you want to know about more somatic work, reach out. Question. We're available. And until the next time, we'll do another deep dive into something else.